presentation. So hello and welcome again. My name is Tom Goldsby, and I am delighted to welcome John Santagate, who's going to be presenting on the topic of augmenting the workforce with AMR. AMR, again, being Autonomous Mobile Robots. I'm the professor of supply chain management and Haslam Chair of Logistics at the Haslam College of Business at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee. I also serve as co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Business and Logistics. Our subject expert today is John Santagate. John is a veteran of our masterclass programs and a veteran of many different aspects of the supply chain industry. He's worked in technology, sales, consulting, and industry research before joining forces with Körber Supply Chain in 2019. I'm also keen to point out that John is an instructor at his alma mater, the University of Massachusetts at Lowell, and also served on the advisory board for their MS in Business Analytics program. So he's a great friend to the Academy. We appreciate that. Finally, it's also important for me to point out that John is a member of the Tennessee Squire Association, which means that he holds a title to a small but significant plot of land at a certain distillery in Lynchburg, Tennessee, and is an honorary citizen of Moore County, Tennessee, despite his residence in the greater Boston area. John, it's a pleasure to have you back with us. Welcome.
Happy to be back, Tom. Always a good time spending 30 minutes talking technology with you.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to turn things over to you in just a few minutes, but let me cover a few items with our audience here. First of all, you might be wondering, why are we here, particularly if this is your first instance with the Masterclass series brought to you by Körber Supply Chain. Well, what we want to do is tackle the challenges of today's increasingly complex supply chain and bring you best practices and innovative thinking from academics like myself, as well as industry insiders and senior leaders like John. What are we trying to accomplish? Well, this Masterclass series is dedicated to disruption mitigation. And there's no doubt that today's supply chains are laden with complexity, uncertainty, and prone to disruptions of all kinds, big and small. So we want to get a better sense on how we can mitigate disruption, but also perhaps turn those disruptive circumstances into opportunities and perhaps even gain business, gain share by virtue of being particularly effective at mitigating disruption. Note that this is the third of 4 classes in this Masterclass series. We're going to round out the series next Tuesday. However, don't fret if you've missed any of our previous sessions. They are available on demand, as will this session be available on demand within 48 hours after its completion. I also encourage you to take note of the 5 previous Masterclass series that we've conducted to date on a variety of subjects dealing with contemporary topics in supply chain management and advanced technologies. Those are also available to you on demand to view at your leisure. So with that understanding, let's go over some housekeeping items very quickly. First of all, your phone lines are muted out there, so don't worry about any potential disruptions you might be experiencing there at home or in the office. We can't hear a thing. However, we would like to hear from you in the form of questions. And just simply go to the GoToWebinar menu and find the Questions tab and submit a question at any point during our presentation today, and I'll direct those questions to John at the end of the session. I'll be the one monitoring the question board, so make sure you get those posted, and we'll be sure to get those to John. Also, in the GoToWebinar menu, you will find a handout tab, and today's handout is a white paper titled A Solution for All Seasons, Using Innovation to Manage Peak Seasonal Demand. A very timely white paper brought to you by the folks at Körber Supply Chain. Hey, at the outset of the session, we directed a poll question to you that asked, how do you see your workforce changing post-COVID? And there you see the results. 100% of you indicated increase in technology adoption, which is incredible to have 100% response. So we're expecting to use enhanced technologies maybe to improve decision-making, perhaps operations, maybe both. So John, I think that's a pretty fascinating result from our survey, and I think that AMRs could possibly be a component of the suite of adopted tools. Also, we see 69% of you expect to see an increase in work from home, and perhaps many of you are working in that capacity now, and it just might stick for a number of administrative activities. 50% of you indicated enhanced social distancing guidelines, and also improved sanitation processes, a topic that we've covered, and autonomous mobile robots might actually be helpful toward improving sanitation of distribution operations. And then finally, 25% indicated complete change in staffing strategies. Hey, John, any reaction to these poll results as you take a look at what came in?
You know what, Tom? I think the top two with increased technology adoption and increasing working from home make a lot of sense. But I do think that, you hit the nail on the head. There's certain roles and responsibilities that can be work from home. We're talking a lot about what's happening in the warehouse, where you need to have people on the floor, or else you can't really move your stuff. So I think that's an important thing to think about here moving forward, is how do we leverage the increased technology adoption to inject safety and additional capabilities for those workers that have to put themselves at risk at times and make their way into the warehouse. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Excellent, very good. Well, hey, with that, why don't we get into the topic of the day? And I've got a few observations before I'm going to turn things over fully to John. And I'd like to start off by taking a quick look at macroeconomic data. Academics like myself just salivate over a chart like this. What you see here is e-commerce sales as a percent of total sales in the US. And you see that it was nice, steady ascent, meaning that more and more commerce was migrating to the online format throughout the starting point here, throughout the 2000s up to 2020, a nice, steady growth. However, that steep ascent is obviously what we've experienced in the throes of the COVID pandemic. 44.4% increase in the second quarter. And if it's possible for that to sustain itself, I think we're expecting much the same of the third quarter, that many customers were new to online e-commerce, and it has stuck with a great many of us. And also those who were previous veterans of online are directing more and more share of our household purchases to the online format. That is certainly a big impetus for some of the changes that we're seeing in supply chain management, and the expectation it's going to, again, largely hold. And a challenge that comes with that is, how do we staff in the supply chain to accommodate such an abrupt, dramatic increase in online? It's a very different proposition to move each's individual items than to pick, pack, and ship pallets. And it takes a lot more people to do it. You see one e-commerce logistics provider there with their stat, they expect to bring on 25,000 seasonal workers this year. That's up 19% over what they did a year ago. And this is but one example. Imagine if all providers in that e-commerce space are trying to do the same thing. And I didn't even mention, this is not Amazon. So imagine what's going on throughout the industry as you try to accommodate that, given that it's harder and harder to recruit talent. So many companies are looking to automation. If we can go to the next slide, I'd like to share with you a perspective that maybe some of you have about automation. That there are many myths out there associated with automation, and maybe they're antiquated thoughts. And I'll just allow you to kind of read down through these sentiments, perhaps. And we're going to ask John to counter these sentiments. But you might think that automation is the domain of the mega shippers. It takes substantial investment. It replaces human labor, and so forth. You might get a sense that it's a very fixed solution, not flexible in terms of the nature of the operation that's required, or in terms of the scale that is required. And again, I would suggest, again, these are myths, these are antiquated notions, but maybe some of you still harbor, or you work with people that harbor some of these antiquated thoughts about automation. Now, our speaker today is going to help counter these thoughts. And so if we can go to the next slide, I've offered some quotes that come from the gentleman, John Santagate, who's going to be with us for the balance of our presentation. He's going to be able to expand on these thoughts. But one observation that I picked up from you in the past, John, you say, whereas traditionally a DC may have had to ramp up during peak seasons from 50 to 100 people, for example, it could now achieve the same by adding 10 people and 25 robots. Another observation there, you say people can do things that robots can't do. You can't do a complete job without them. The real value of technology is when it augments with people's ability to help them be better at their jobs. In both of these instances, it doesn't look like you're suggesting that we get rid of all people and we bring in the robots. However, you seem to suggest that robots could be an important part of the solution moving forward as we unfortunately continue to be in the throes of pandemic, and also perhaps beyond the pandemic. Robotization and AMRs, autonomous mobile robots, could be integral to where we're going. So John, I'm going to turn things over to you. Why don't you take it from there?
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, and I'll just start by saying, the move towards flexible automation, to hit one of those myths out of the way straight away here, was occurring, a couple of years ago. The market's rather new, but we've seen in the course of a very short period of time a rapid adoption of this technology area. And what we're seeing now, in combination with the growth in e-commerce, in combination with the need for changing execution models in warehousing and fulfillment, is an increased level of interest that will result in an increased level of adoption of mobile robots for many reasons, right? One of which being, leading up to the pre-pandemic period, most warehouses and many industries that relied on manual labor were faced with a shortage of labor, not the inability to bring people into the workforce. And so the genesis of this technology was really to allow organizations to continue to operate as they would to meet their demands within a constrained environment. And now that may have changed slightly at this point in time. The investment reasoning may be different, but the demand is continuing to increase, and that challenge around labor shortages will come back as soon as things sort of revert back to normal and we start to get back to a more normal state of employment. So I think these, the starting point occurred a couple of years ago, and I think the current circumstances are just going to help accelerate growth in this market as we move forward. That said, if we could jump to the next slide here, we're really here to talk about disaster avoidance and how we can leverage technology to adapt to disruption in our supply chains. And there's really three things, primary things that you can do relative to disaster. The first is to avoid it. How do you set up your policies and procedures that would enable disruption avoidance? But as we've seen recently, not all disruption or potential disruptions are avoidable, right? Calamities occur, tsunamis occur that take out distribution centers. Global pandemics occur that shut down the world economy for a short period of time. And the disruption today is sort of two-dimensional. You've got the one side where, retail organizations have seen a real shortage of customers. On the e-commerce side of the business, a tremendous increase in demand. So the need for products has continued, just how customers are buying them have changed. And that's really, on either side of that equation, is a disruption itself. So how do we set up policies and procedures and the tool sets that allow organizations to avoid potential disruptions on the front end? But for those disruptions that cannot be avoided, right, we then have to respond. The disaster has occurred. What is it that the organization is prepared to do from the perspective of the policies and procedures it's put in place to respond to that disruption, to get business, to keep it going under a state of duress, but then work to get things back to normal. And then that third state here is to mitigate the impact. What can be done to reduce the amount of negative impact of a potential disruption? A good example there is the idea of redundant suppliers. For example, if there's a risk in the supply chain from a supply perspective, having a redundant source of supply creates a mitigation strategy for that disruption. And I like to look at peak season as a ongoing form of disruption. Some are very well equipped to mitigate that disruption, that it becomes second nature. But at the end of the day, that's a function of avoidance and mitigation to be able to respond to significant peaks and valleys in demand by setting up the tool sets, the policies, and the procedures to reduce the potential negative impact and the potential to miss customers' SLAs, as an example, during periods of peak. And so, I think for many supply chain organizations and warehousing, it's inherent in what we do to plan for disruption. And a lot of that today is leveraging the right tools and technologies to allow us to mitigate those points of risk. If we could jump to the next slide here, I wanted to talk about what it means, what augmentation really means, and going way back when the $6 million man was augmented human, right? He was equipped with robotic tools inside of his body that made him bigger, stronger, and faster than the average human, and made him more capable to do things. And that's what augmentation kind of means. Augmentation is the process of increasing the size, value, or quantity of something by adding to it. And in this case, when I think about autonomous mobile robots and looking at autonomous mobile robots as a tool for augmenting human performance, it's about equipping people with the best tool for the job that allows people to do their job better. And that's what autonomous mobile robots are really all about in general. And then when we talk about augmenting performance, it's really about looking at those key performance levers that can help to mitigate the impact of a disruption and allow an organization to respond more effectively at a point of disruption. And so that's what we're going to talk about here over the next 10 minutes or so. If we can jump to the next slide here, and we'll click through here, and I'll give you the clicks here, but we can start with that first click. I mentioned I look at robots as a tool, and as with anything, right, the performance of a person and the outcome of a job is impacted by having the right tool for the job. Certainly, hammers and screwdrivers and saws and hand saws are effective tools. They've been around for centuries. These are tools that people have become very accustomed to use. But the question is, if you wanted your house built to the best capability, a new house built to the best capability, Tom, I know you're going through a new build of a home now. Do you want your builder using hand tools? Is that the most efficient way to get that property built? Are they going to put that property together in a timely manner and at a lowest cost possible? If we could click again, the answer there is a fundamental no, right? We've continued to evolve the tool sets that we use for construction. Today, we've got a whole suite of power tools that where, nailing together the frame for a home with a hammer would take a whole lot of people and a whole lot of time and inject a whole lot of risk, right? There's a quality risk that's involved there as well. To where we could have a single person with a nail gun firing off 1,000 nails in an hour. Right? I don't know that that's the right metric, but you get the point. And the point here really is, as we evolve the way we do things and as the tool sets that we can use to do our jobs evolve, we need to continuously look for the best possible tool in order to deliver the best possible outcome for our businesses and for our customers. And so I love the analogy of hammers and nail guns, because it really speaks to the analogy of manual carts. If we could do the next click, which again, this is a staple of the warehouse and the fulfillment operations. Manual carts equipped with an abundance of totes or containers or outbound packages. Whatever the case may be, they get the job done. What we're talking about is flexible automation. It doesn't need to be bolted to the ground, which makes it attainable for organizations of all sizes. Could we get the next click here? And so when we're talking about replacing parts, again, the best tool for the job becomes important when we're talking about autonomous mobile robots. They are not all the same. In this example, we see on the screen here, we've got a Locus robot that's really good at in-aisle collaborative operation. It works with your workers in the field. And in fact, the scanners and everything that picker needs reside right on that robot. Next click, please. We also have the scenarios of goods to person, where mobile racks then come to a worker who stays stationary. Again, you change the way in which the material is moved throughout the process. And one more click here. And it doesn't just relate to eaches and individual unit level items. Moving full pallets with flexible platform type technologies, and we can click one more time as well, is now a reality in many warehouses. We can move all sorts of materials with autonomous mobile robots that now have taken on that non-value added task of moving the materials, allowing us to optimize our labor force and gain greater productivity and efficiency by increasing the capacity of each of our workers to do the right job with the right tool set in the warehouse. If we can go on to the next slide. So a big part of AMRs related to disruption mitigation is how we leverage the tool set to impact the overall performance of an organization. Now, this is data that was collected from IDC's Commercial Service Robotics survey last year, a survey that I had conducted the previous year when I was with the IDC organization, that asked non-traditional users of robotics about their experiences and many other things. But the biggest takeaway that I had when I did the survey, and it was very closely repeated the following year, is the impact that this technology area is really having on KPIs. There was a total of about 14 metrics that were asked about. Here's a snapshot of 4 key warehousing metrics: improving productivity on the upper left, improving customer service, increasing operating capacity, and then increasing speed. And what you'll notice if you look at the improved productivity line there is that you see 88%. That's 88% of all respondents fell into 3 categories of improvement: 11 to 15%, 16 to 20%, and then greater than 20%, meaning 88% of the companies that were surveyed that you put robotics into their operation in non-traditional environments realized a double-digit increase in their productivity metrics, right? And so you're getting the realization of your people being able to do more. And we saw similar improvements across customer service, capacity, speed, and several other metrics. So when we bring these metrics together, we're creating an overall more efficient operation that becomes more resilient and capable of responding to disruptive scenarios because there's less waste throughout the overall process. We can jump to the next slide. So looking here, it's how they're improving these performance metrics, right? From an efficiency perspective, you're taking certain aspects of the requirements of a job that a person would do, example, pushing a cart through a pick path, to now having the ability to transition to a zone-based picking methodology where you keep your picker in the aisle and they work with robots that come to them and tell them exactly what to do. Or you keep your picker stationary and bring the work to them. That drives up efficiency because your workers are no longer spending time walking miles throughout the warehouse to complete their tasks. You drive improved labor management. I think that's inherent in what we've been talking about. The scalability, flexibility, and adaptability is incredibly important, especially talking about peak and other disruptions. There's new business models related to mobile robotics that allow you to, on demand, drop in additional capacity. If you've already got a system set up where you're using robots in collaboration with your people, and you see a spike in demand coming down the road, this is what that quote Tom was talking about earlier is meant to represent. You can bring in X number of robots that increases the capacity of each of your existing workers, bring in a smaller base of additional workers, and fulfill the demand that might otherwise take an abundance of additional labor. And then often overlooked is the increased quality. There are quality checks all throughout the process when you're using robots. The technology is really driven by integrating all aspects of the pick into the technology, so it becomes very difficult. You might have to say you have to try to make an error because the robots are telling you and showing you what to pick, where to pick it from, and where to put it. So it really becomes, very simple, not just to execute, but also to train and onboard new employees, which when you're talking about disruption mitigation and having to add people back into an operation, bringing down training times becomes imperative. Next slide, please. So what does this all mean for disruption mitigation, right? The ability to quickly adapt to change. Change is inherent in what we do. We deal with it in the supply chain on a daily basis. Disruption is about rapid change, and how do we rapidly respond to change that we were not prepared for. I guess that just addressed the second bullet there, the ability to adapt from and recover from disruption. As disruption occurs, the ability to bring people back on board more quickly, or have less reliance on a massive pool of labor, but still be able to complete the task by having a smaller pool of labor and the right tools in place, reducing the training times to get your workers, new workers and temporary workers up to speed far more quickly, and driving scalability. And I did add in there increasing worker safety. This technology is not going to run into the people. It's not going to run into carts. It's not going to run into the racks and risk knocking things over. Because it's really, you can't deploy these things on the floor of a warehouse if they don't meet certain safety guidelines. And so they are designed with a sensor suite and technology that makes them operationally aware of their environments. So in the interest of time, let's jump to the next slide here. It goes without saying, you know, coming out of the COVID circumstances, there's going to be a lot of change in supply chains worldwide as we look for ways to mitigate the risk of a similar disruption in the future. That means, in some instances, transitioning from a 1-shift to a 2-shift fulfillment operation, for example, to inject distancing into the operation but maintain the same amount of capacity. That means making investments in technology, as 100% of you indicated you would be doing, to help smooth the impact and gain efficiencies of your people in the process. It also becomes interesting to think about the idea of leveraging mobile robots as autonomous sanitation technologies. There are robots today that can navigate through a warehouse and create aerosol sanitation spritzers or UVD lighting arrays that kill, you know, all of the pathogens. I actually had the opportunity to meet a startup before the pandemic over a year ago in Denmark, and thought it was fascinating that they were building this mobile tool for hospital operations. And then, you know, 7 months later, there's a global pandemic, and I reached back out to him, and the guy that runs the business said, "This is the best thing that's ever happened to our business. I hate to say it, but we're sold out, and we're trying to scale up our business today." Now there's a lot of competition in that space, but that's changing the way in which we think about things. Trent, how do we continue to meet the increasing demands from our customers in the warehouse and the fulfillment operation, but do so in a way that's safe for our people to work and remain working in those environments, and to allow us to scale to adapt. Last slide I have here, you four, is a bit of a dark horse on this conversation. It's not really about disruption mitigation. It's about human augmentation in its almost purest form. There now are full body powered exoskeleton suits. Could you imagine having a worker that was able to continuously lift 200 pounds repetitively without any risk of overexertion and strain on their body? It's actually become a reality. I know it's a use case that's in use in certain airlines for baggage handlers, as an example. Think about yourself traveling, dropping a 50-pound bag on there, and it goes in the conveyor and then goes away and shows up on your plane. There are people that are handling that in between, and those people put a lot of strain on their bodies over and over again to move those luggages. And today, you know, technologies like these exoskeleton suits are helping those people be safe and healthy to remain working longer, and again, reduce the risk of physical ailment as a result of modern technology that's designed explicitly for that purpose. So I thought that would be just a really cool thing to end with, specifically about human augmentation. With that, I know we're bumping up towards the end here, and I'll pass the baton back to Tom.
All right, thank you, John.